What's your reaction to this investigation?
So I think, like everything, I mean, I picked up my copy of the paper this morning, and clearly it was concerning details. Unfortunately, not all of it does stack up, and I think what I would say in terms of the people who have looked at this project, particularly those allegations about historical costs, the National Audit Office, at the period of looking at the costs of the land acquisition, has gone and looked at many of these allegations before and found that there isn't anything there to substantiate them. And I think all of us want to know why phase one, which is the bit between Old Oak Common and Birmingham, has gone up in price so much. I don't think it's anyone, however, trying to deliberately mislead the government. And the reason why that doesn't really stack up is that the Department for Transport have their own people inside HS2. The HS2 board, all of those meetings are ones that the Department for Transport see everything of. So this kind of concept that somehow HS2 Limited could act independently of the government, I think is wrong. And I don't think the evidence is there to substantiate it. And some of the specific allegations made by people like Tony Barclay, who unfortunately do this all the time, that people, for example, have been paid off and been able to sign non-disclosure agreements in order to get payoffs. I mean, it's just not true. And there's been parliamentary questions asked about it. So I think that it's unfortunate that the Times has probably been hoodwinked slightly by people who have their own agenda, like Lord Barclay. And I think what is more important is to look at why did the cost of phase one go up so much? Why is money that was supposed to be in the end used for railways in the North and the Midlands being spent on an overspend in the South? And the reason for that is largely the government made some really strategic mistakes. And it does actually mention in the article that the railway is too fast and too straight between London and Birmingham. That's probably the real reason why we're in this mess. It's not because of fraud or malevolent intent from anyone who works inside HS2. It's because when we decided to build this railway, we made it too much about speed and not enough about capacity. And as someone who wants to build more railways in this country, because it's vital to get more freight and more commuter services, I am disappointed that issue was never remedied. There were numerous times for the government to do that. And what they've instead done in the last few years is continue to change their mind about various parts of the project to delay elements, which has actually just put the price up. So rather than getting to grips with some of those fundamental issues, which probably have led us down the wrong path in some of the decisions that were taken, burning contingency money to continue building a route that was probably just too expensive when things could still have been done to change that. It's too late now. And actually, the issue falls to ministers and particularly their officials, many of whom have been working on this project, many civil servants working on it, who in recent years have probably made it worse rather than better. And the point was that government supervision was supposed to be there to keep the project on track, not to make things worse.
I do hear what you're saying, Henry, but it is worth saying that this is a 3-month investigation by the Sunday Times. They've been given access to internal HS2 emails, files, cost calculations, also secret recordings of employees describing how cost figures were downplayed. Whether you believe any of these allegations or not, surely there is something to be said for maybe the need of an inquiry into this, to look into these allegations, but also the broader HS2 project, which has gone way over budget, which Rishi Sunak has now cancelled the northern leg of. Whether you were pro it from the outset or anti it or have changed your mind along the way, it's been a mess.
So, specifically, your colleague has obviously been told to investigate HS2, and this is what they found. My challenge is that when it comes to the allegations that are made by Mr. Bruce and Mr. Thornton, for anyone who's read the article, those are the ones I referenced where the National Audit Office, who are beyond reproach, right, and have written negative reports about HS2. They wrote some very unkind things about HS2 and the government's performance on Euston, particularly about the government's performance around what's happened around Euston Station. So these are not sort of HS2 cheerleaders. They've looked at those specific allegations and they've not found anything there to raise any concern. And as I alluded to, unfortunately, people have given comments and made representations to the Times that are factually inaccurate. And so I'm not here to defend HS2 Limited. That's not my job. My job's to represent businesses and the interests of the north of England. And I don't work there and I've never been on the board of HS2. But what I don't want to do is for people to misdirect the criticism. Because actually, if you're the now Prime Minister who was Chancellor for many years, you bear culpability, right, for what's happened in HS2 in recent years. This does look like people around Number 10 looking to get journalists and others to sort of create smoke where there may be a fire, when in reality the fire is burning right at the heart of government. That's where the mistakes have been made. And so I'm all for finding out who's to blame, right, for what's gone wrong. Do you mean the money that's been wasted between London and Euston, between Old Oak Common, and Birmingham, was supposed to be spent largely on railway lines in the north of England, and now the government says that money isn't there? Well, it's because they spent too much on the rest of it in order to be able to then afford the rest of it in their logic. And I think my framing of this issue really is there are lots and lots of people who have lots of opinions about this project. Clearly they do. But what you can't do is rewrite history to sort your own version of what you want it to tell you. Does that make sense? The challenge is we needed a new railway line between the north and London. We started building it between London and Birmingham to keep largely a lot of Tory backbenchers who didn't like the project happy. We built tunnels we don't need. There's an 11-mile tunnel under the Chilterns that if you were in France, right, you would never build. And there are things in this article I do agree with. So it points out the fact that a TGV line costs about 1/15 per mile of what this will cost, the phase one section between Old Oak Common and Birmingham. Well, the reason for that is that as people like Christian Walmart, who's been speaking down the road from me here in Yorkshire this weekend at the Ugly Literature Festival, do you mean that Christian's not a fan of HS2? He's made the point in the run-up to the decision that, well, tunnels cost 10 times as much. So you don't have to be great at maths to realise where the money's gone. And for internal political management reasons, the Conservative Party chose to buy off unhappy backbenchers. Some of them now departed. And so people like Cheryl Gillan, who's now passed away, do you mean she was representing her constituents? I understand why she was doing it. I have no malice against her in particular or any other individual. But it was a political decision to spend public money to make it politically easier to build this railway, because it was always hard to build a project to benefit the North and the Midlands and disadvantage people who lived in the leafy shires, because they're the people who had to put up with it being built. But rather than winning the argument about why we need national infrastructure and doing what they do in other countries like France, where if you don't like it, they'll just compensate you and you can move away. If you don't like the look of the railway, we'll buy your house off you for more than it's worth and you can just go away. It would be a lot cheaper to do that than build tunnels we don't need. Most of the way between Ealing and Birmingham, you'll be in darkness on these trains because
that's crazy.
You won't see the countryside because you'll be under the ground. So that's the scandal, right? There's definitely a scandal here. I just don't think going around accusing people of being fraudsters when they're probably, and the evidence shows they likely are not, is the right way of going about it. And I hope that other colleagues at the paper will look at those other issues, right? Because the Sunday Times and the Times newspaper have a long-standing record of excellent journalism. Actually, the Times' transport correspondent, Ben Clatworthy, has written some very interesting pieces actually about this. 6 days a week. So I've no malice against the paper or the Times newspapers collectively on this. I just don't think today's article is a fair reflection of the reality of the situation. And I'm an observer, right? I mean, I've been affected by this decision, as in I'm the person having to deal with the problem that we've not got any money left. I'm not one of the people who spent the money. And what I don't want to do, though, is for people who have their own agenda to rewrite history